Hello, it's time for another science lesson, and we are finishing up our human body section, and we are focusing on controlling processes today. So these are the systems that control the processes in the human body. How does your body sense and respond to stimuli? We've already talked about stimulus and response before, but now we're really going to get in detail. So it's time to get started. Remember, one of the systems responsible for control is the nervous system. The nervous system provides fast electrical signals, so this is rapid response. Okay? It receives information about what's happening inside and outside the body. Okay, so lots of information coming in, and then for that matter, lots of information going out, sending signals, receiving signals constantly and very quickly. The parts of the nervous system are the brain, the spinal cord, and all of your nerves. So what's a nerve cell? So a nerve cell is a neuron, and it has parts called dendrites. And dendrites are like little branches, okay? And they receive information. They can receive information from multiple neurons, but it's wherever they are connected to. And then the axon sends the information to the next cell. So really quickly, let me show you. All right, so here are the dendrites. See all these branches, okay, all over like this, the dendrites, okay? They are going to pick up signals. This is the part of the nerve cell called the soma or cell body. That's not a vocabulary word you need right now. And this is the nucleus, okay? So once these dendrites pick up the signal and it goes in the cell body, it's going to begin traveling down the axon, so in this direction. And it's going to travel all the way down the axon until it gets to the end of the axon. And then there's a little itty bitty space between this neuron and the next neuron. So here are the dendrites of the next neuron. And here's the axon of the first neuron. So in this space, that little bitty space called the synapse, neurotransmitters carry the signal from this one to this one, okay, crossing the synapse, and then the signal continues. Okay, so that's the basic premise of how nerve signal transmission works. There are three main types of neurons. We have sensory neurons. That should make sense. Haha. It's your senses. It picks up stimuli. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you touching? What are you tasting? What are you smelling? Interneurons are connectors in between interneurons. And then motor neurons, they send a message to a muscle or a gland. So one of the things they're responsible for is movement. Sensory neuron, it's hot. Interneuron, move your hand away. Okay. So what is a synapse? Remember we talked about it. It's right here. Here's another example of it. It's that space between the axon of one nerve or neuron and the dendrite of the next one. So in order for the signal to be transmitted, it has to cross the synapse. All right, so what happens there? It's the space between two neurons. Chemical signals. Remember, hormones are chemical signals? Well, this is another type of chemical signal called a neurotransmitter, and they carry the impulse across the synapse. And then the nerve's signal gets continued. The nervous system can be divided into two main parts, the CNS, or central nervous system, which includes your brain and your spinal cord. It controls most functions of our body and mind. So it contains the brain, all interneurons, those in between. It's protected by tissue, fluid, and your skull. And then we have the spinal cord, which is also protected by tissue and fluid, but this time by our vertebrae. So the brain has voluntary actions that you control. You decide, I'm moving my hands right now, okay? And I'm blinking, all right? Involuntary, not under conscious control, meaning if somebody throws something at me, I don't control that I blink. It just happens. So the parts of the brain that you should know, the cerebrum, the largest part of your brain, most of your brain up here. It controls sensory input, movement, learning, and memory. And then you have the cerebellum hanging down in the back. That's responsible for balance and coordination. And then the brainstem, which sits right on top of your spinal cord, is responsible for basic life functions like breathing and heart rate. Okay, so here's an illustration. The cerebrum, that big section of your brain, the cerebellum hangs like a bell in the back. The brainstem sits on top of the spinal cord, and then that's it. That's the parts of the brain. Well, what about the spinal cord? The spinal cord links the brain to everything else, the peripheral nervous system, the PNS, which we're about to talk about. Most impulses travel to and from the brain and spinal cord. Almost everything goes that way. Okay, if I look back at this picture for a second, you could see how these are all of the nerves coming out of the spinal cord. Okay. So the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is nerves. They branch out from the brain and spinal cord, but primarily the spinal cord. They start or end at the spinal cord, so that's important. They're arranged in pairs, right side, left side. So there's a nerve coming on a spinal cord that controls the right side of this arm, and there's another nerve that would control the left side. So the peripheral nervous system is divided into two main parts. We have somatic. That's like stuff you want to do, voluntary, like walk and talk and type and pick up your phone and all kinds of things. And then there's the autonomic nervous system. I think it sounds like automatic. So it's involuntary actions like digestion and whether or not your pupils dilate when someone shines light in them. But then what about a reflex? What happens? So a reflex is involuntary. The pain is a common stimulus. So that's a reason that most people would have a reflex response. So a sensory neuron picks up that pain. That signal travels down to the spinal cord, goes to an interneuron, and then directly back out to a motor neuron so that you move right away before going to the brain. It eventually does go to the brain because you're able to interpret the information, but it does not go to the brain before you respond. Okay, so you respond automatically, a reflex. All right, I'm going to put a link to this video in the description, so I highly recommend watching it. Okay, now the endocrine system. The endocrine system releases slow chemical signals. So it regulates the body by releasing hormones, which again are chemical signals, into the bloodstream. The parts of the endocrine system are glands or organs that produce and release hormones. And they release them into the bloodstream. So endocrine glands are absolutely dependent on the circulatory system. What is the link between the endocrine system and the nervous system? There are two regulators. First one is the hypothalamus. That's in your brain. It links the endocrine and nervous system and controls some basic things like eating, drinking, and body temperature. But the most important part for that is it controls the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland is the master gland. Okay? It's your master endocrine gland. And it controls all the other endocrine glands. It makes so many different hormones that stimulate and regulate other glands. Right? So here is your brain. Again, we already talked about the cerebrum, talked about the cerebellum, talked about the brainstem, the spinal cord. Well, right here is your hypothalamus. Okay, that's the link between nervous and endocrine. And then you have this gland right here, little P-shaped thing, pituitary. Okay, hanging right here, super important. And that's the master gland. So what about some other glands? We have the thymus, which is important for the immune system development in children especially. We have the pancreas, which makes insulin to lower blood sugar, but also glucagon to raise blood sugar. The pineal gland is responsible for daily rhythm, so your sleeping and waking cycle. The pineal gland produces melatonin, And some people take a melatonin supplement to help regulate that daily sleep wake. And then you have your thyroid gland. It produces a hormone called thyroxine, and it's responsible for regulating your energy level and your metabolism. We also have the parathyroid gland, which produces calcitonin, which, not surprisingly, regulates calcium. We have the adrenal glands. They sit on top of our kidneys, and they release a hormone called adrenaline, adrenaline, and it's responsible for the fight or flight response. There's a stress hormone, cortisol, also produced by the adrenal glands. And remember, exposure to long-term stress can have many negative effects on the body. And also, the adrenal glands contribute to water balance, which makes sense. They're sitting on the kidneys. Then we have the testes. They make testosterone. They are responsible for male sexual development and sperm production. And then we have the ovaries producing two main hormones, estrogen and progesterone, and they're responsible for female sexual development, as well as egg development and controlling the lining of the uterus, the menstrual cycle, a whole bunch. This song, fantastic. I highly recommend this song if you haven't already seen it. I'm going to put a link in my description to this video, but please check it out. All right, so negative feedback. What does negative feedback do? It keeps balance. It maintains homeostasis. We discussed this with the body when we did body temperature and blood oxygen levels. So here's an example. The calcium levels get too high, so the thyroid releases calcitonin. The calcium levels go back down, back to homeostasis. If the calcium levels are too low, the parathyroid releases a parathyroid hormone, and then your calcium levels rise. So it's a system that is meant to keep you at homeostasis, like sweating and shivering. But it's for a lot of different things that are happening in your body at the same time. Okay, so there you have it, controlling systems. It's the endocrine system, slow hormonal control, needing the circulatory system, needing the blood for hormones to be transmitted from the gland to their target cells. And then we have fast control with the nervous system, and that includes things like reflexes, like the peripheral nervous system, the central nervous system. Okay, it's electrical signals that transmit the impulses quickly. And remember, we need neurotransmitters to cross that little itty bitty space, the synapse, okay, in order for that signal to go from neuron to neuron, right? So there you have it, controlling processes. I'll see you next time.